if you're looking at an operation theater and you're finding some a problem which is related to implants, or it's problem which is related to surgery, so you'll have to spend time with doctors in actual surgical environment and see how the existing practices are and what are the existing needs that you can get out of it. Some of the indicators for identifying problems that may lead to clinical need from a patient's perspective is pain. So whether existing processes, what is the the pain, does it take a lot of pain? If it is a pain, then that is a clinical need. Whether existing processes, does it cause solutions, does it cause a death, or does it cause existing practices, does it the problems which leads to death? So that is a need. So, or the stress level, which is if a patient is having too much stress for a specific medical device or a specific scenario, so this could be one of the indicators for a clinical need. And from a doctor's perspective, so these are some of the risks, some of the clinical needs. One would be risk, and if the doctor is going to be doing specific surgery, or if the doctor is going to do a specific delivery, or he's going to get infected from a virus, that could be a risk, exposure to certain environment, uncertainty or malfunction. So these are some of the indicators that you need to take into consideration for a clinical perspective of how need can be from a doctor's, a provider's perspective. And from a systems perspective, it is cost and it is inefficiency. So the cost, existing device cost can be very high, and there is a need for an alternative which is low cost, affordable, cost effective. Or then can be inefficiency. For example, an X-ray machine, it could take some 3 hours to make a X-ray machine, but you could have an AI algorithm which can do all the processing for within 3-4 minutes. But it doesn't make sense as long as the X-rays that comes in 3-4 minutes. So it has to be efficient. So this is an example. What I would say, if there is a X-ray machine, if you can make it faster, easier, something which is more cost effective, and the inefficiencies can be reduced. So you cannot just be solving one part of the problem, which an AI can solve by doing automation and interpretation, but the inefficiency can lie in the other side of the problem. So these are some of I'll share all the information. So these are some of the processes, like description, examples, when you're doing an observations, like set up observations, prepare the document it, and name the problem, test it and refine it, and what is the specifications that you will have to go through, and some of the examples. So this is an example in developing need statement development. So need statement development, need for a more effective cutting device. So one of the things that I was telling you in the beginning of this talk was that two people could be working on a same problem, a same clinical need, but the way they look at that problem could lead into two different solutions. These are the two examples. One is a person is looking at a problem statement which is a need for more effective cutting devices to perform sternotomy. So sternotomy is one particular problem here we're talking about, but he's looking at there is a need for effective cutting. So he's just boiling down to that specific need. But if you look at the other person who wants to solve that problem, there's a need for a way to access chest to perform procedures on organs of thorax. So if you look at the same problem and much more broader, so you could find a different technology or different way to solving that problem, and you would end up developing something better. So one of the fundamentals is you look at how you can make the the process, how you can make your need statement much more refined by looking at the need specification, how you can make it much more efficient, effective, and how it is better than existing solutions. Need can be a need to prevent. So this is some of the fundamentals. For example, considering the difference between simplified need statements, a method to prevent recurrent hip dislocations in patients after surgical treatment of a first hip dislocation. So the other method is a method to prevent recurrent hip dislocations in high-risk patients, a method to prevent hip dislocations in high-risk patients. So these are some of the three different things how you could go about for one specific problem and how you are basically seeing the problem in a much more broader way. And so this happens very quite often when you are doing an innovation, and it is more of an iterative process, and it has to be a very refined process. It takes a lot of time to come up with a very refined process. And so these are some of the common changes in outcomes and how they are measured in need statements. So necessary changes, it can be improved clinical efficiency, increased patient safety, reduced cost, improved physician facility productivity, improved physician ease of use, patient convenience, and accelerated recovery. So, and how these are measured are all these things, like it could be treatment, clinical outcomes, or the cost effectiveness, and so on and so forth. So you could go to any doctor and you could say that, what are the problems you are facing, and they would come up with a lot of different problems. And these are measured in these categories. So they want something alternative, they want something cost effective, or they want something convenient. So these are those metrics for that. Okay, so need criteria is basically when you have come up with a need statement, there is a need criteria for that. Need criteria is like a cross-checking mechanism. When you have come up with some need for a alternative for existing treatment of diabetes, wound healing method. That is just an example. So you would look at that need statement, and you would see your data. What is the data? What is the criteria that led to that? And that is that specific criteria that you should be validate with existing need statement that you have developed. So when I say the criteria, it can be all the information that you collected through the observations, through the interviews, and those should match with the existing final need statement that you have come up with. So that is need criteria. Yeah, so this is an example with urinary tract infection in ICUs, and you are basically saying that we want to make it cost effective, we want to make it safe, we want to reduce the time taken for the treatment process. So all these things, when you have a cross-checking mechanism, whether the observed and the specifications, need specifications that you have gathered, is it matching with the need statement that you have developed. So these are some of the process that you follow for this, and what is the examples for this is here. So it could be translating problem to need statement, verifying the accuracy of the need statement against the problem, and confirm the solution need, that is the solution, and validate it with doctors, validate it with the patient care providers, validate it with other stakeholders, and define the need criteria and classify them. So when you have a bunch of different needs, clinical needs that you have identified, and when you have to boil down to screening these needs, so you would go about need screening, and that would start with disease state fundamentals, treatment options, stakeholder analysis, and market analysis, and then need filtering. So how many of you had dilemma, like two different problems, which one to solve? You had dilemmas like, so how did you come up with that challenges. So that is the process. A medical device innovation process has certain ways to go about doing that. So some of the things are like you look at the clinical needs, you look at the existing disease state. When I said fundamentals of disease state, a need can be must have or a nice to have kind of a thing. And when you look at a simple, safe mechanism for reducing frequency of stress, urinary inconvenience in elderly women. This is one example. So the disease state fundamentals is, if you're solving a clinical need, you should know the particular, the pathology or the physiology or the other aspects like that particular disease. And when you are looking at heart diseases, cardiovascular diseases, you cannot develop a device without actually knowing the electrical activity of that specific disease. So understanding the disease state, it involves knowing the anatomy, physiology, and pathology, symptoms and outcomes, and the economic impact of the disease. So one of the things is that you need to have a full understanding of what is the specific disease that you're solving, what is the specific problem that you're solving, and you do a deep research into that specific problem. And if you're looking at a problem, very, very common problem, heart diseases, you need to know the electrical activity of the heart, you need to know how the existing, the pathology and how the existing different conditions are there. So when you boil down all these things, then you would have an understanding whether you can you have the capability to develop some device which solves that problem. So this is just an understanding of the disease state. Some of the key areas, yeah. Sorry? Yeah. Economic impact of the disease, as in like if a specific disease has a certain problem in certain group of target audience. For example, there is a target audience in some state has specific condition, and that is causing a problem for the government to spend more money on that. That could be an economic impact. And so the whole dynamics in the market is changing because of that. That is an economic impact. Yeah.
And also maybe suppose how is the patient, for example, if it's say chronic disease,
yeah,
and it is affecting the patient's livelihood.
Yes.
If we can, rather than if something can be done about just improving the productivity of patient even while we cannot solve the disease completely. I don't know, that may be one.
Yeah, economic impact is in spending, and also the patient's productivity and how it is affecting the country's economy and all those things. So the economic impact outlines the disease of the healthcare system. So yeah, so the government can be spending a specific budget for that specific, polio or some vaccines or something like that, but that is affecting the ecosystem, that is affecting the condition.
For example, certain vaccines which are say already subsidized by government.
Yeah.
If a company tries to enter into that space because it's already subsidized,
yeah,
you may not make profits.
Yeah.
For people. So that may be one of the things in which you have to consider before it.
So these are like the general perspective, like what are the things that you need to consider. So you need to consider all these things like clinical outcomes, epidemiology, all these things when you're looking at the fundamentals of disease state analysis. So yeah, this is an example for heart diseases. Like, so if you're looking at heart diseases, like some of the devices are there, wearable devices, which monitors your electrical, activity, and it gives alerts when something, when there is a high stress level, or if it can use some AI-based algorithms for detecting early symptoms. So it starts with symptoms, it starts with the existing, practices and how you, gather all this information and how you use the knowledge to, it basically validates your process of development. So all these aspects. And treatment options. So treatment options can be, the goal of any treatment is to improve outcomes. So in these patients, so it can be any disease or disorder. So you need to look at what are the existing treatment options, what are the patient requirements, what are the existing available therapies, and where are the the existing treatment for specific diseases can be a specific drug or some kind of a device which gives certain clinical outcome. So you need to look into that specific aspect of what is the existing treatment, how you can improve the quality of life in those scenarios, and whether this makes sense for you to go about. So when you list down all these treatment options, so treatment options fundamentally, it gives you an understanding of what is the existing potential gaps and whether the gaps are larger and whether the development of some unique solution for that larger gaps will be a disruptive innovation. And in contrast to that, if there is a smaller gap, it will only be an incremental or a modification. And you would also know what is the patient requirements that is going to make the change clinically. So when you are claiming a very large change, it requires very rigorous data, clinical trials, and so on and so forth. A lot of publications are required. Say you are saying that you are claiming, I am going to, just an example, you are claiming that I am going to develop a wearable device which is going to predict one day earlier before that there is going to be a stillborn baby, so you will look at all these parameters like the fetal heart rate or the fetal movement or all these things, and you could develop some proprietary algorithm, some novel ideas. But when you are claiming something, but it has to be validated, so it has to be tested, it has to have enough data to support that. So it all comes with a lot of pilots, a lot of clinical validation. Yeah. So yeah, these are some of the treatment options. Like if you look at one can be a behavioral or a lifestyle modification. One can be medicine based or some therapy or energy based. Like for jaundice, you use this phototherapy for giving treatment for babies. And percutaneous is basically using catheters for for if there is a heart disorder. So one company have used a defibrillator, catheter kind of a defibrillator, which is implanted. Name is so yeah, some of the treatment options, like minimally visible invasive treatments, procedures like used in pacemakers and open surgeries, the tools which are used for surgeries. So these are some of the treatment options that.
So the apps probably are in the first place, behavioral and lifestyle modification. Most of the apps.
Yes, yeah, apps, yeah. Yeah. Any questions? Any questions so far? So how you identify different gaps in existing treatments is basically you look at different things like what is the existing technology platform and what is the state of disease and what is the existing different stages of diseases and what is the existing solutions that are coming up, what are the emerging solutions, and you would basically identify those gaps and how you can, it all comes down to the value proposition. It is just going to, you're just claiming you're just solving that small problem, it would not be that impactful. But if you're claiming that you're going to solve a bigger value proposition, bigger problem which is going to save a life or which is going to change the way how the practicing certain kind of a surgery is done, which reduce the risk of mortality, so that is a different thing. So all these comes to different treatment gaps and different problem statements that you identify. And yeah, so the next thing is stakeholder analysis. So your stakeholder analysis, you speak with existing market distributors or dealers, or you speak with hospitals, and you understand the dynamics of the market. So you then it makes sense for you to see whether the initial prototype. So you might have spent a lot of lakhs of money getting grants or getting investment, developing a product. But at the end of the day, at the end of 3-4 years, you develop and it is not being accepted. So that could be a product, failure. That you can reduce the chances of risk by actually doing some kind of a analysis with speaking with existing stakeholders, and always make sure that you are constantly updated with the market dynamics. Yeah. So by doing stakeholder analysis, you understand what is the different perspective. If a distributor is there or if a hospital is there, what is their perspective, whether they are willing to adopt new technologies, if they are willing to adopt new products from a startup or new companies, and what is their thought process. So this you can only know or if there is an anticipation for resistance, because you are doing something totally different, totally innovative, that it is going to disrupt other markets. So there could be some anticipation. So you need to take into these considerations when you go about developing devices. So stakeholder fundamentals are basically, you look at all the aspects of market need. So market, it could be private players, healthcare providers, patients, and government officials. So you look at all these market dynamics and you make sure that all these stakeholders are being taken care, because you're going to develop something for a larger audience, and you want to make sure you're basically checking in all the aspects of stakeholders. So this is one of the cycle for care analysis for renal disease. So renal disease, say if a patient has, this is just a life cycle. If the patient has a specific condition, in a kidney problem, he is basically visiting a primary hospital and basically getting tests done, and the diagnosis confirms that he has certain condition, renal condition, and he's being referred to a nephrologist. And a nephrologist is being referred to that dialysis clinic, and he gets dialysis, and then he is basically getting the transplantation, and then he gets the transplantation, and then they are again reviewing, and the transplant after follow-up process is happening. If the patient doesn't go to a primary care, he ends up going to the director emergency, and it goes to direct nephrologist. So you need to look at the existing care perspective. If you are solving a clinical need, what would be their way of approaching to get existing treatment, and how you could go into any of these places to get your product. Yeah, so whether the market analysis that I'm talking about, whether the product that you are developing, is it compelling? Is it something that is accessible to market to support them? And are there any hospital doctors or any, so when you approach a hospital, by the way, so you won't be directly selling it. You'd basically approach a doctor, and you would basically tell about your device, the novelty or whatever you're doing. Once the product is out, I'm talking about, and they wanted to test your device. They want to test it on 1 or 2 patients when it is ready. And initially they'll call for a demo, and you would basically giving a demonstration, and they would test it on a patient. And if it basically is better than existing devices, and it is solving a problem, and it is in terms of value proposition, if they feel that this is something that they wanted to use it, or as an alternative or as a secondary option for existing treatment options, or existing the screening or any tools like that. So that is the process that you go. You approach the doctor, and that doctor is basically recommending to the purchase team to purchase your device. So you would basically speak to the doctor, convince the doctor with the demo and giving the device for a few days, and that clinical outcomes is basically being referred. There is a committee which sits, purchase committee in any hospitals. Then you would go about doing the vendor registration, and if everything goes well. So you need to look at whether the doctor will be willing to pay, whether there will be any kind of a competition. Yeah. So a lot of doctors will ask if you are claiming something totally, bigger, which is not available. For example, a company which I know is developing a device which monitors the labor pattern, partographs. So they are doing something which is totally portable, wearable, and easy to use, and it gets all the data and gives alerts. So the existing devices are somewhere between $10,000, $20,000. This is just few $100. So there is a large value proposition, but the quality can be totally different. The quality of thing can be different. So you would only get that kind of a quality when you do a lot of test and trial process. You would perfect it over a period of time. Yeah. So yeah, market analysis basically coming down to the total market potential, and you would basically knowing what is the sustainable, whether anyone is willing to pay, through the market analysis, identifying competitors, existing stakeholders. So this is one of the important things that you need to look at is the whole market segmentation process. So market segmentation, which would involve what are the existing players and what are the existing market size. If it's a $1 billion market, you'd put that number and you drill down to what is the existing dynamics, drill down to what is the existing market needs, and you look at the target market where exactly that you are targeting, whether it is primary care or it is tertiary care or it's just private hospitals, and then you list down who's willing to pay. So all these things will happen when you do a test and trial process. So the way you do the market segment is basically you boil down from market size to market dynamics, and from market dynamics to what is the market needs, and from market needs to willingness to pay, and that is your target market. So market size can be very big, but when you drill down, into speaking with people and see the interact with a lot of different stakeholders and see the profit margins and strengths and weaknesses, because you would have very limited resources in terms of your sales force or your distributors who can reach only a minimum number of people, or the acceptance can be very less, or very specific audiences can take that devices at a early age. So these are the things that it would go about drill down to. It can be a $7.5 billion market, but only a few crore rupees of target market that you have identified or your target for the next few years could be. So these are some of the indicators, like you define the favorable market, you look at the pricing, whether the margins are good enough, or you look at the existing need, or you look at the existing growth, whether it is growing market. So these are some of the things you need to consider. Yeah. So when you have filtering different needs, you would have to assess certain metrics. Based on those metrics, you will have to give some value. So some of them would be a metric based on patient impact. So patient impact, it would be a life saving. You would give a 5 rating for that. Or if it is reducing just a morbidity, addressing just need of the morbidity, or eliminating the risk of serious complications, it would be like a 4-star. Or if it is just addressing the need or eliminating certain symptoms which might progress, and that would be a 3-star. So that is just a value. Or it is not solving any problem, just one, because it is just an replica of an existing solution. Or the second can be addressing the need would be just a convenient way of doing things. So you would basically, this would be the value proposition. This would be the value proposition, and that is what these are some of the metrics that you would look at. Okay, I want to focus on this problem because this has a more potential, because it solves some bigger problem. It has a more patient impact perspective. These are things you look at. Yeah. Yeah. Which one?
In this, it is not a commercial viability rating, I would say.
This is based on patient impact. This is patient, yeah. Yeah.
Where profitability could be much higher than the life screen space.
Yeah, so this we are talking about need filtering. When you are filtering the need based on the patient's impact, and you would rate these needs, which are the highest that you wanna. It could be just a need for a specific, convenient way to use a medical device, or a device that is saving a patient. Then you would go for saving a patient rather than just a convenient way of using. So this is on a patient's perspective how you would filter the needs. On a treatment landscape perspective, you would look at the existing. If there is no existing treatment for a disease like Ebola, and you're coming up with something diagnostic tool or some screening tool, so it could be some higher kind of a rating for that. So based on the fourth one was basically there are no existing treatments available, but there are numerous companies which have already tried and tested. So you could look at all these things you would find in the research papers or the papers which has already been published, and that's how you can segmenting. And this is basically you know, on a life-saving basis. Life-saving basis, if you are looking just for saving a life of a patient from specific disease or a condition or a disorder, so you would basically look at what is the need that is most likely is going to save a patient, or